I was 28 years old and had only been living in Michigan for a short time when this happened. It was winter, one of those days when the sun hangs low in the sky and disappears far too early. I had spent the entire week working from home and decided to take a short walk on a state park trail near the city, just to get out for a bit and clear my head. The trail wasn't very busy that time of year, especially in the late afternoon, but I knew the place well enough not to consider it risky. I parked my car as the sky was starting to turn orange and put on gloves and a knit cap, feeling the dry cold enter my nose with every breath. The trail was partially frozen, with sections covered in hard-packed snow and others slick, where ice showed through underneath. The silence was almost total, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps and the wind moving through the leafless trees. I walked quickly, more because of the cold than any real hurry, planning to turn back before it got completely dark. I hadn't seen any other cars in the parking lot besides mine, and that gave me a strange sense of isolation, but still within what felt normal for that time and season. It was at the narrowest section of the trail that I noticed movement ahead. This part funneled between two denser patches of woods, with the ground completely hardened by ice. I saw a silhouette approaching from the opposite direction, moving far too slowly for someone trying to stay warm. As we got closer, I noticed something that didn't fit the scene. The man wasn't wearing a coat, no gloves, no hat. He was dressed only in a thin hoodie and regular pants, as if he were walking on an autumn day, not in the middle of a Michigan winter. His breath came out heavy and visible in the cold air, and his face was flushed in a strange way. When we were just a few meters apart, he stopped. He didn't give me enough space to pass comfortably. He stood too close, invading that boundary you feel in your body before you even think about it. His gaze was fixed on me, barely blinking, as if he were trying to memorize my face. He asked if I lived around there, and if I always walked that trail alone. His voice sounded hoarse, tired but firm. I answered with short phrases, saying I was just out for a walk and needed to head back before it got dark. He tilted his head slightly and asked how long I'd been there, glancing quickly behind me in the direction I had come from. That made my stomach tighten. I tried to step aside, indicating that I needed to pass, but he didn't move right away. He stayed there in that narrow spot as if the space were too small for both of us. He asked if I had come alone by car and where I had parked. That put me on full alert. This wasn't random small talk. The questions were far too specific for someone just trying to be polite. I answered vaguely, saying the parking lot was nearby and that I was in a hurry. He gave a half smile that didn't match the tone of the conversation and took a deep breath, that heavy, uneven sound that felt like too much effort for someone standing still in the cold. I passed him as soon as there was the slightest bit of space, my entire body tense as my shoulder nearly brushed his. I didn't look back right away. I just kept walking, quickening my pace despite the risk of slipping on the ice. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the echo of my own steps, but it quickly became clear there was another rhythm. When I slowed down, the steps slowed. When I sped up, they sped up too. I heard no voice, no attempt at conversation, just that steady sound following me along the rest of the trail. My heart started pounding too hard, and I felt that strange heat in my chest that comes when your body goes into full alert. I didn't want to run, because the ground was treacherous and a fall there could be serious. At the same time, walking at a normal pace felt impossible. The sky was already turning dark blue and the light between the trees was fading fast. I didn't look back, but I was sure he was still there. The footsteps neither got closer nor farther away. They kept the same distance, as if he were calculating exactly how close he needed to be without touching me. At times, the sound of footsteps disappeared for a few seconds, giving me a brief hope that he had given up. But as soon as I slowed down or veered slightly off the trail, they returned. There was no coughing, no talking, no audible breathing anymore, just the sound of ice crunching behind me. That was worse than any direct threat. I started thinking about the parking lot, about the fact that my car was alone there, isolated, and about the possibility that he already knew exactly where I would be in a few minutes. Every meter of the trail felt longer than it should have. When I finally saw the opening of the trail and the start of the parking lot, I felt a relief too brief to be real. The open space didn't bring the sense of safety I expected. On the contrary, the parking lot looked exactly as I had left it, empty, silent with my car isolated near the edge, surrounded by trees. The nearest light pole flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows on the ground covered with ice and packed snow. I quickened my pace, already pulling my keys from my pocket, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped them. That was when the footsteps behind me stopped. I paused for a second, not daring to turn around right away. The silence that followed was far too heavy. I glanced quickly over my shoulder and didn't see anyone emerging from the trail at that moment. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. I walked to my car with my entire body tense, scanning the area constantly. When I reached the driver's door, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were fresh footprints in the snow around the car. They weren't old or mixed with mine. They were clear impressions going back and forth along the sides of the vehicle, as if someone had circled it for a few minutes. The footprints didn't lead away from the car. They clustered around it, near the doors, behind it, in front of it, as if someone had been walking in circles there without going anywhere else. There were no visible tracks leading back toward the trail at that moment, at least not that I could see under the weak light of the pole. My first instinct was to get into the car as fast as possible. I unlocked the door, nearly yanking the handle, and got in without looking back. I locked everything as soon as I sat down, even knowing it wouldn't change much if someone was nearby. My hands were so cold it took me several seconds to get the key into the ignition. Before starting the car, I looked in the rearview mirror. The parking lot was still empty. No silhouettes among the trees, no movement near the trail. Just the silence and those marks on the ground, too fresh to ignore. I started the engine with more force than necessary, making it complain in the cold. As the car warmed up, I felt a presence I couldn't quite explain, that sensation of being watched even when you don't see anyone. I shifted into gear and left as quickly as I could without losing control on the ice, checking the rearview mirror several times as I pulled away. I drove for several minutes without being able to relax. My shoulders were stiff and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel far too tightly. Only when I reached the main road with other cars passing and lights around did my breathing begin to return to normal. Even then, the image of the footprints around my car wouldn't leave my mind. They weren't random marks. They weren't from someone just passing through. They were from someone who had stopped there, walked around, waited. And the fact that I hadn't seen anyone in the parking lot only made it more disturbing. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. I thought maybe he had taken another path or that the footprints were old and I simply hadn't noticed them before. But none of that explained the way he appeared out of nowhere on that narrow stretch of trail, without proper clothing for the cold, or the overly specific questions, or the footsteps following me all the way to the end. If it had just been a strange encounter, it would have ended there. It wouldn't have continued in silence calculated all the way to the parking lot. I never went back to that trail in winter. In fact, I avoid little-used trails to this day, especially near dusk. Because on that frozen afternoon in a Michigan state park, I learned that isolation changes everything. It gives space for someone to observe, test limits, and disappear without explanation. And what scares me most isn't wondering what that man wanted, but knowing that he was near my car before I was, and chose not to be there when I arrived. Story 2. I was 24 years old when I decided to camp alone in an authorized but very isolated area in rural West Virginia. I already had some camping experience and chose that spot precisely because it was quiet, far from roads and more populated areas. I arrived in the late afternoon with the sun still high, set up the tent calmly, and prepared something simple to eat. The place was too quiet, the kind of silence you only notice when you stop talking. I didn't see any other tents nearby, which didn't worry me at the time. The idea was exactly to spend the night alone and leave early the next day. When it got dark, the temperature dropped quickly. I went into the tent, zipped it closed, and lay down in my sleeping bag, listening to the normal sounds of the woods at night. Insects, some small animal moving far away, dry leaves crackling in the wind. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was tired, but it took me a while to fall asleep. More because I was alert to the environment than out of fear. The tent was set on a small flat clearing surrounded by trees, and I clearly remembered walking around it before going in, checking that everything looked normal. There was no sign of anyone nearby. It must have been late at night when I woke up with a strange feeling, even before noticing any sound. It was that kind of sudden awakening, as if something in the environment had changed. I stayed still inside the sleeping bag, listening carefully. There were no footsteps, no branches breaking, no nearby breathing. The silence felt even heavier than before. Then I felt a light contact on the side of the tent. It wasn't a hard shove or anything abrupt. It was pressure, soft, steady, as if someone had placed an open hand on the fabric and was testing it, feeling it give. My whole body tensed immediately. The tent sank a few centimeters at that spot and then returned to normal, as if the pressure had been removed. I held my breath for several seconds, trying to understand whether it could have been the wind, but the air was still. No gusts, no trees moving. A few seconds later, the pressure returned, a little farther forward, at the height of my leg. Again, with no sound accompanying it. No approaching footsteps, no rustling leaves, just the touch through the thin fabric, far too deliberate to seem accidental. I didn't move. I didn't try to speak or sit up. I stayed completely still, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard outside. The pressure moved slowly, sliding a few centimeters along the fabric, as if whoever was outside were searching for something specific, feeling the tent section by section. It wasn't a hurried touch. It was calm, almost careful. That was what scared me the most. There was no urgency, no rush. Whoever was there seemed comfortable staying in the dark, touching the tent without announcing themselves. After a few seconds, everything stopped. The tent returned to its normal shape and the silence became even more intense. I waited to hear footsteps moving away, a branch snapping, anything that would indicate movement. I heard nothing. That put me in a strange state because it felt as if the person were still there, just standing still. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the dark fabric of the tent, trying to decide whether to turn on my flashlight. Part of me thought turning on the light might make the situation worse. Another part knew that staying in the dark, not knowing what was happening, was unbearable. I gathered my courage and turned on the flashlight. The light flooded the inside of the tent abruptly, making my eyes sting for a second. I waited to see a shadow move outside, a foot, a silhouette cast on the fabric. I saw nothing. No shadow, no movement, no change in the tent's shape. The silence remained absolute. I kept the flashlight on and sat there, breathing slowly, trying to hear anything beyond my own blood pounding in my ears. A few minutes passed and nothing happened. Gradually, I began to think it might have been a curious animal, even though that didn't explain the complete absence of sound. After some time I can't really measure, I turned off the flashlight and lay back down, but I couldn't relax. Every time the tent fabric shifted slightly with my own movement, my body reacted as if something were touching it again from outside. I stayed awake for hours, not knowing whether I was overreacting or whether something had really happened. At times I thought I heard very light footsteps around the tent, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind trying to fill the silence. The night seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if time were moving more slowly out there in the middle of nowhere. When the sky began to lighten slightly, I felt immediate relief, mixed with a strange apprehension. I got out of the sleeping bag carefully, as if something might react to the smallest movement. I slowly unzipped the tent and stuck my head out, looking around before fully stepping outside. The campsite was silent, exactly as it had been the night before. No objects out of place, no disturbed backpack, no obvious marks near the entrance. For a moment, I thought maybe everything had been a product of fatigue and isolation, but as soon as I stepped outside the tent and looked at the ground, that idea vanished. There were human footprints in the damp earth around the tent. Not a few, not random. They formed a complete circle as if someone had walked around it several times, following the exact outline of the tent during the night. The tracks didn't lead away in a straight line. They looped around. Some overlapped, others were deeper, as if the person had stopped in certain spots. They weren't old footprints. They were recent, clearly defined, made after the light rain the night before. I stood there staring at them, my stomach sinking. Someone had been there, not just passing by. They had walked around the tent long enough to leave that pattern. I stood there for several minutes trying to understand what I was seeing without panicking. The footprints showed no hurry. There were no signs of someone running, stumbling, or quickly leaving. It was the kind of trail you expect from someone walking slowly, with time observing. I made a full circle around the tent, following the tracks, and in some spots you could see where the person had stood longer, the ground pressed down more deeply, as if they had been standing there. That immediately reminded me of the exact places where I had felt the pressure on the fabric during the night. The positions matched in a way that sent a chill through me. I packed up my things faster than I ever had before, without eating, without organizing anything properly. Every sound in the woods now felt too close. As I took down the tent, I kept looking around, expecting to see someone among the trees. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of not being alone wouldn't go away. When I finished, I took one more look at the ground, trying to see where the footprints went after completing the circle. They blended into the vegetation and became hard to follow, as if the person had left carefully, choosing where to step. I walked to my car with the weight of that night still clinging to me. The short path to the parking area felt longer than it had on arrival, and I couldn't stop looking back. Every tree trunk, every shadow among the bushes felt like a possible place for someone to be standing and watching. When I reached the car, I locked the doors immediately, even before starting the engine, and sat there for a few seconds just breathing. The feeling wasn't complete relief. It was the sense of having escaped something I didn't fully understand, but that had been far too close. During the drive back, I tried to rationalize everything. I thought about animals, about curious people, about someone lost. But none of those explanations fit with the careful touch on the tent, the absolute silence, or the pattern of the footprints. It wasn't someone just passing by. It was someone who stayed, who walked around, who tested the thin boundary between the outside and my most vulnerable space while I slept just centimeters away, separated only by thin fabric. I never camped alone again after that night in West Virginia. I still enjoy trails. I still like isolated places. But the idea of being completely exposed overnight changed forever. What haunts me most isn't imagining what that person wanted to do, but the fact that they could have done something, and chose only to observe, touch, circle. Sometimes terror doesn't come from an attack or a chase. It comes from realizing that someone was there for hours, far too close, leaving no sign except the certainty that you were never truly alone. Story 3. I was 31 years old when this happened, and I was driving home alone after a long holiday in rural Kansas. I had decided to take a rural road to avoid traffic on the main highway, something I had done other times without any trouble. It was already past 10 at night, and the scenery had been the same for miles. Open fields, wire fences, distant silos, and no houses with lights on. The radio was playing softly, more to break the silence than to actually listen. I was tired but alert, counting the minutes until I got home. The dirt road was narrow with no shoulder, and the car's headlights illuminated only the immediate stretch ahead, kicking up fine dust with every curve. There were no other vehicles around, neither coming nor going. At a certain point, after a gentle curve, I saw something in the middle of the road that didn't make sense. I slowed down, thinking it might be an animal standing there, maybe a deer. When I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing right in the center of the road facing the car, far too still for someone surprised by headlights. I slowed even more, almost stopping, trying to understand what was happening. The man didn't move out of the way or gesture with his hands. He just stood there staring at the car. He was wearing dark clothes and seemed thin, but it was hard to make out details in the direct glare of the headlights. When the car finally stopped a few meters from him, I felt that immediate discomfort, like something was very wrong. Roads like that don't usually have pedestrians at night, let alone someone standing in the middle of them waiting for a car to appear. After a few seconds, he began to move. He took slow steps toward me, completely unhurried, as if he knew I wouldn't drive forward. As he got closer, I could see more clearly what disturbed me the most. He was smiling. It wasn't a wide or friendly smile. It was restrained, fixed, as if he were satisfied with the situation. He didn't raise his hand to ask for help or point to anything around him. He just walked straight toward the hood of my car, keeping his gaze locked on me through the windshield. My first impulse was to lock the doors, even though I knew that wouldn't matter if he was only there to talk. I lowered the window slightly and asked, in a voice louder than I intended, if he needed help. He didn't respond. He kept approaching until he was just a few steps from the car. The smile never changed. It was as if he were waiting for something specific from me, without needing to say what it was. That gave me a cold feeling in my stomach that's hard to describe. There was no urgency in his behavior, no sign of desperation or a clear request. Just that slow approach, far too confident for someone standing in the middle of a dark road. When he reached the driver's side, he stopped. He stood there, leaning slightly forward as if he were about to say something at any moment. I could hear my own breathing loud inside the car. I briefly thought about accelerating and driving past him, but the fear that he might throw himself in front of the car or try to open the door made me abandon the idea. That was when I realized there was no one else around. No distant lights, no sounds other than my car's engine running. That road felt completely cut off from the world, and the feeling of being trapped there, even inside a vehicle, started to take over. That was the moment I decided to leave. I slammed the car into reverse without thinking much about the consequences. The car jerked backward, kicking up dust, and I felt my heart nearly jump out of my chest. The man didn't try to chase me or show any sign of surprise. He simply took a step to the side, still smiling, watching as I backed away down the dark road. That was perhaps the strangest part. He didn't seem frustrated. It felt like that too was part of what he expected to happen. I turned the car around as quickly as I could on that narrow stretch, afraid of skidding on the loose dirt. As soon as I was aligned in the opposite direction, I accelerated without looking back for several seconds. Only when the distance had grown a bit did I dare to check the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. There was no sign of the man walking, running, or standing there. He simply wasn't visible anymore, as if he had stepped out of the headlights' reach with the same calm with which he had appeared. I drove for several minutes with adrenaline still high, trying to convince myself I had done the right thing. The road remained deserted, just like before, but now every curve felt like it might be hiding something. I slowed down a bit to avoid losing control and started paying attention to everything. The mirrors, the sound of the engine, any headlights that might appear behind me. My mind tried to find reasonable explanations, someone drunk, someone asking for help in a strange way. But none of them fit with the smile, the silence, the fact that he hadn't said a single word. Then, as I rounded a long curve, I saw something in the rearview mirror that made my stomach sink again. There was another car stopped on the road, exactly at the spot where I had encountered the man. Its headlights were off, but I could see the outline of the vehicle sitting in the middle of the road, as if it were waiting. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside, but the position was far too precise to be a coincidence. It wasn't a broken-down car pulled over to the side. It was stopped in the center of the road, the same way the man had been just minutes earlier. The moment I realized that car was there, I felt an immediate tightness in my chest. I didn't slow down to get a better look. On the contrary, I accelerated a bit more, afraid that any hesitation would be a mistake. In the mirror, I saw the other car's headlights turn on slowly, one after the other, illuminating the dust hanging in the air. It didn't start following me. It stayed there, headlights on, exactly as if it were waiting for someone to appear at that specific spot. The idea that this might have been connected to the man in the road made me feel ice cold, but I didn't want to think too much while I was still out there. I kept driving until I reached the main highway where I finally saw other cars passing by. Only then did I slow down and feel my body begin to relax, though the trembling in my hands didn't go away. The rest of the drive home was done in absolute silence, no radio, no distractions. I just wanted to reach a lit place with people around where that dirt road would be behind me. I parked in front of my house and sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside, staring at the empty street and trying to understand what had happened. In the days that followed, I told the story to a few people, hoping to hear rational explanations that would calm me. Some suggested it might have been someone trying to stop cars for some reason. Others said it could have been a coincidence. But none of those explanations addressed what bothered me most: the smile, the silence, the way he didn't try to stop me from leaving, and the fact that there was another car parked in the exact same spot minutes later. It didn't feel improvised. It felt repeated, almost routine. To this day, I avoid rural roads at night, especially those without lighting or cell service. Whenever I see something stopped in the middle of the road, my reaction is immediate. Slow down just enough to decide how to get out of there, never to come to a complete stop. Because that night on a dirt road in Kansas, I learned that not all danger presents itself by chasing you or asking for help. Sometimes it just waits in the dark, in the middle of the road, confident that someone will stop. Story 4. I was 29 years old when I spent a weekend alone at my family's lake house in rural Wisconsin. It was off-season, so almost all the houses around were closed, with covered windows and empty docks. I had stayed there alone before, but always during the day. That was the first time I decided to sleep there with no one else around. The idea was to rest, read a bit, and enjoy the silence. I arrived in the late afternoon, unloaded the car, and locked the door as soon as I went inside, more out of habit than fear. The house had 2 floors, with the second floor accessible by an external wooden staircase that led directly to a side door. That staircase had always made noise, even when someone went up slowly. That night, after preparing something simple to eat, I went upstairs to the bedroom and stayed there reading, with a small lamp on and the rest of the house dark. The lake was completely silent. No boats, no strong wind, just the distant sound of water gently hitting the shore. Around 10:30, I turned off the main light and kept only the lamp on, ready to sleep. I was almost asleep when I heard the first creak of the wooden staircase. It wasn't a random crack the house sometimes makes at night. It was the clear sound of a step being stepped on. My body reacted before my mind, and I sat up in bed automatically, staying silent to listen better. A few seconds later, there was another creak, closer, followed by another. Someone was climbing the external staircase, step by step, unhurried. The wood complained under the weight in a very specific way, far too heavy to be the wind or a small animal. I stayed perfectly still, mentally counting each step by the sound. I had known that staircase since childhood. I knew exactly how many steps there were up to the second floor door. When the sound stopped, I knew the person had reached the top. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. No knocking, no attempt to open the door. Just the certainty that someone was standing out there, on the other side of the wall, just a few meters from me. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid I'd make noise just by breathing. I waited to hear footsteps going back down, some indication that the person had left. Nothing happened. The silence remained heavy, as if someone were standing there listening too. The bedroom suddenly felt smaller, and every tiny sound of the house seemed far too loud. The lake outside, which had been peaceful before, now felt distant, useless. I thought about grabbing my phone and calling someone, but the signal there was weak, and the idea of speaking out loud made me panic. I sat on the bed, completely motionless, trying to decide what to do without drawing attention. A few seconds later, I heard a faint sound near the door. It wasn't a knock. It was something like a shift of weight, a short step, maybe someone adjusting their stance in front of the second floor door. My stomach churned. That confirmed the person hadn't left. I got up slowly, trying not to make the floor creak, and locked the bedroom door, something I rarely did there. I pushed a light chair against the door, more to feel less exposed than because I believed it would actually stop someone from entering. After that, I stood there in the dark, waiting. Time began to stretch in a strange way. I couldn't tell whether minutes or nearly an hour had passed since the footsteps stopped outside. At times I thought I heard something very subtle, like fabric brushing against the wall or a distant breath, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just my mind trying to fill the silence. With every small crack of the house, my body jolted. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, expecting to see the handle move at any moment, but it never did. At some point during the night, exhaustion began to compete with fear. I stayed awake, sitting on the bed, unable to truly lie down. The silence outside remained absolute. No footsteps going down the stairs, no creaking moving away. That made me even more uneasy, because it meant I didn't know when or if the person had left. Only near dawn, when the light began to gently brighten the room, did I feel my body relax a little, as if the presence of light brought a minimal sense of protection. When I finally worked up the courage to unlock the bedroom door, it was already fully morning. I opened it slowly, expecting to smell something different or hear some strange sound, but the house was as silent as it always is in the off-season. I walked cautiously toward the second-floor door, looking out the window before getting close. The lake looked normal, the water smooth, no one around. Only then did I open the external door. Cold air rushed in at once, bringing that damp smell of wet wood the house always has after the night. That's when I saw the marks on the ground. Boot prints, well-defined, still damp, positioned exactly in front of the door. There was no trail of someone pacing back and forth. They were the prints of someone who climbed the stairs, reached that spot, and stood there. The wood around them was darkened, as if water had been dripping from the soles of the boots. My stomach sank immediately. That confirmed the footsteps hadn't been my imagination. Someone had been there outside, standing in silence while I was locked inside just a few meters away. I stood there for a few seconds staring at those marks, trying to understand what they meant without panicking. The footprints didn't lead off to the sides, nor did they look like someone had left in a hurry. They were simply there, positioned facing the door as if the person had stood in that spot for a while. I took a few steps back and looked at the wooden staircase. There were damp marks on several steps indicating the ascent, but I couldn't clearly identify where the person had gone back down. That bothered me more than it should have. It was as if the trail was deliberately incomplete. I closed the door and locked it again, even though it was daytime. I packed my things quickly without having breakfast, without enjoying anything else about the house. Every room felt different now, smaller, less welcoming. As I carried my bags to the car, I looked around constantly, expecting to see someone between the closed houses or near the lake. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I got into the car, locked the doors, and sat there for a few seconds, breathing deeply before starting the engine. On the drive back, I tried to find logical explanations. I thought about someone lost, a curious neighbor, an early fisherman passing by. But none of those hypotheses explained the silence, the time spent standing in front of the door, the fact that there had been no knocking, calling, or attempt to enter. Whoever climbed that staircase didn't seem to be there by mistake. It felt like someone who arrived, stopped, and stayed. And that was what scared me the most. I never again spent the night alone in that house during the off-season. I still go to the lake, I still like the place, but only when I know there are other people nearby. Because that night in Wisconsin, I learned that silence can be deceptive. Sometimes it doesn't mean peace, it means someone is close enough not to need to make any noise at all. Story 5. I was 34 years old and traveling for work through Mississippi when this happened. It was one of those short trips, passing through small towns where almost everything closes early and nighttime options are limited. After a full day of driving and taking care of things, I decided to stop at a simple bar near the motel where I was staying. It wasn't anything fancy, just a place with a worn wooden counter, a few scattered tables, and a TV on without sound. When I went in, there were very few people and the atmosphere was far too quiet for a bar. More like a place people go just to kill time. I sat at the counter, ordered a beer, and looked around, trying to relax. The bar smelled of old alcohol mixed with frying grease, and the loudest sound came from ice being dropped into glasses behind the counter. Besides me, there was only one other customer sitting a few stools ahead and the bartender. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I took out my phone to reply to a few messages and thought about leaving soon after finishing the drink, since I didn't feel like staying long. That was when I heard the sound of a chair being dragged right next to me. The man who had been sitting farther down pulled his chair and sat exactly beside me, far too close for such an empty bar. He didn't ask permission or say anything as he settled in. He just sat down, rested his elbows on the counter, and ordered a drink from the bartender as if that were the most natural choice in the world. I felt my body tense immediately. There were several empty seats, including on the other side of the counter, but he chose that tight space, pressing his arm against mine unnecessarily. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just a lack of personal space awareness. A few seconds later, he turned his face toward me and commented that I must be tired from driving. That made me look up from my phone. I answered something generic, saying yes, it had been a long day. He nodded and said work trips are usually like that, especially when you pass through towns too small to be worth staying in. The way he said it caught my attention, because it was exactly what I had been thinking at that moment. Still, I tried not to make anything of it. I looked back at my glass, hoping the conversation would die there. He didn't let the conversation die. He commented that I didn't seem to be from the town and asked where I had come from that day. I answered vaguely, without naming specific places, but that didn't stop him from getting details right. He said I had probably taken the main highway before turning onto those smaller roads full of empty gas stations. He said it while looking at his glass, as if just thinking out loud. That gave me immediate discomfort. It wasn't a generic guess. It was exactly the route I had taken hours earlier. I asked how he knew, trying to keep my tone light. He gave a half smile and said, "You can tell by the look of someone who's driven too much." From that point on, each comment seemed to cross a new line. He talked about the motel near the road, saying it was the kind of place travelers usually stay because there aren't many options. He commented on the time I had probably arrived in town, late enough to find everything closed. I began to feel that cold knot in my stomach that comes when something doesn't add up. I hadn't told him any of that. I hadn't mentioned where I was staying or which roads I had taken, and yet he spoke with unsettling ease, as if he were just sharing casual observations. I responded less and less, hoping he would get bored. Instead, he seemed to grow more comfortable. He said that town didn't see many outsiders, that it was easy to spot who was just passing through. He said it while looking directly at me for the first time, with a short, almost satisfied smile. That gave me the clear feeling that I had been analyzed since the moment I walked into the bar. I started paying attention to his details. Simple clothes, nothing eye-catching, a voice that was too calm, a posture too relaxed for someone talking to a stranger. There was no aggression, but there was no normal curiosity either. It felt like control. I finished my beer faster than I had intended and told the bartender I was closing out my tab. The man didn't react right away. Only after I stood up did he comment, in an almost casual tone, that I should be careful driving at night on those roads. He said they were long, dark, easy to get lost on. The way he said it sounded less like advice and more like a statement of fact. I thanked him without looking at him and walked toward the door with that strange weight on my back, as if I were being watched with every step. When I stepped outside, the night air felt colder than before. The parking lot was almost empty, lit only by two weak light poles that left large areas in shadow. I walked toward my car trying to act normal, but something made me stop before getting in. I looked to the side and saw the man from the bar standing near the door, a few meters behind me. He wasn't heading to any car. He wasn't on his phone. He was just watching the parking lot, hands in his pockets as if evaluating options. His posture was calm, far too relaxed for someone who had simply stepped outside to smoke or look at the street. I pretended to look for something in my pocket to buy time and observe him better. He didn't approach, but he didn't move away either. His gaze followed the movement of the few cars passing on the main road, then returned to me. That gave me the clear sense that he was deciding something. I got into the car quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw him take a few steps toward the parking lot, then stop again, standing there motionless as if reconsidering. I waited for him to turn away and leave, but that didn't happen. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly at first, more to watch the rearview mirror than out of caution for the street. The man remained standing near the bar entrance, not following me right away. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. What unsettled me was precisely the lack of urgency. He didn't seem frustrated that I was leaving. He seemed like someone who hadn't yet decided whether he needed to do something. When I turned the corner, I looked one last time in the mirror and saw him still there, motionless, watching the car disappear down the main road. I drove straight to the motel without turning on the radio, without taking my eyes off the road. I parked as close as possible to my room door and sat inside the car for a few seconds, looking around before getting out. I didn't see any other strange vehicles or anyone walking through the lot. Even so, I locked the door as soon as I went in and left the light on for a long time. The conversation at the bar kept replaying in my head, especially the details he shouldn't have known. The route, the type of motel, the timing. None of that had come from me. The next morning, I woke up early and left town without stopping to eat or do anything else. As I drove, I tried to find a logical explanation that would truly reassure me, but I couldn't. He hadn't made any threats. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't openly followed me, and yet the feeling was that I had been watched from the moment I entered that bar, chosen for being alone, passing through, with no one nearby who knew me. To this day, when I walk into an empty bar in a small town, I pay attention to where I sit and to who chooses to sit too close. That encounter in Mississippi taught me that not all danger announces itself clearly. Sometimes it just approaches slowly, comments on things it shouldn't know, and then watches in silence, evaluating whether it's worth going further. And what bothers me most is thinking that night, the only thing that may have saved me was the fact that I left before he made a different decision. Story 6. I was 27 years old and traveling alone through North Carolina when I needed to stop to sleep at a simple motel in the interior of the state. It was already late, close to midnight, and I was too tired to keep driving. The motel was right off the highway, one of those older ones with ground-level rooms and doors that opened directly onto the parking lot. The reception was small, lit by a harsh white light, and the clerk seemed more interested in finishing his shift than in talking. I took the key, went into the room, and locked the door as soon as I closed it, purely out of reflex. The room was basic but clean enough. I left my suitcase near the bed, took a quick shower, and turned off the light. The parking lot was almost empty, and the silence was broken only now and then by a car passing far off on the road. I lay down still dressed with my phone charging beside the bed, and fell asleep quickly, exhausted. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly to a sound so clear there was no possible confusion. The metallic noise of a key being turned in the door's lock. I opened my eyes instantly, my heart racing before I fully understood what I was hearing. The sound wasn't someone knocking on the door or testing the handle by mistake. It was the specific click of a key being inserted and turned, followed by firm pressure against the door, as if the person outside were trying to open it without making noise. I stayed completely still in bed, holding my breath, trying to catch more details. The door didn't open, but the pressure continued for a few seconds, too controlled to seem like an error or confusion. Then there was another sound, short and dry, as if the key had been turned again in the opposite direction. The pressure against the door stopped immediately. There was no swearing, no knock, no sound of footsteps running away. Just silence, a heavy silence like the one that remains after something very wrong happens. I didn't move. I didn't turn on the light, didn't say anything, didn't go near the door. I stayed lying there, eyes open in the dark, trying to hear if anyone was still outside, but I heard absolutely nothing. After a few minutes that felt much longer than they really were, I found the courage to sit up in bed. My body was still stiff, and I felt that fine trembling in my hands that comes after a big scare. I looked toward the door, trying to notice any change in its outline, any shadow passing underneath, but I saw nothing. The curtain was closed, so the room remained completely dark. I thought about calling the front desk at that moment, but I was afraid that would confirm to whoever might be outside that I was awake and alone in the room. I stayed awake for the rest of the night. Every small noise, the distant engine of a car, the click of the air conditioner turning on, made my body react as if the sound of the key might return at any moment. At times I thought I heard slow footsteps passing along the exterior corridor, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind trying to anticipate something. I didn't sleep again. I just waited for the sky to start lightening, watching the clock on my phone advance minute by minute. When morning finally came, the first thing I did was look through the crack in the curtain before even getting out of bed. The parking lot looked almost the same as the night before, with few cars and no unusual movement. Even so, it took me several minutes to work up the courage to get up and approach the door. I opened it slowly, expecting to feel some kind of resistance or see someone standing outside. There was no one there. The corridor was empty and quiet, with that faint, damp smell typical of old motels. Still, the feeling of intrusion hadn't gone away. It was only when I looked closely at the lock that my stomach dropped. There were visible marks around the cylinder, fresh scratches in the metal, as if someone had tried to force the key or used one that didn't fit perfectly. They weren't old marks or wear from time. The metal was still irregularly scored, too obvious to ignore. I ran my finger over them and felt the raised edges of the scratches. That confirmed that the sound in the middle of the night hadn't been imagination or a dream. Someone had really tried to get into that room while I was sleeping. I spent a few minutes staring at the lock, trying to think about what to do without panicking. I decided to go straight to the front desk, still with my backpack on, without packing anything properly. The morning clerk seemed like a different person, more alert, and listened carefully as I explained what had happened during the night. He frowned when I mentioned the sound of the key and went to check the room's record in the system. He said, quite confidently, that no one besides me had access to that key. There was no spare issued, no scheduled maintenance, and no room change during the night. When I showed him the marks on the lock, he looked visibly uncomfortable. He ran his finger over the scratches and said they hadn't been there before because they usually check the doors when cleaning the rooms. He didn't try to downplay what I was saying, but he also didn't offer any plausible explanation. He just repeated that no authorized person had tried to enter the room. That answer, instead of reassuring me, made me even more uneasy. If it wasn't someone from the staff and it wasn't another guest with the wrong key, then who had turned that lock in the middle of the night? I left the motel shortly afterward without having breakfast and without looking back. I drove for a long time without turning on the radio, trying to organize my thoughts. What disturbed me most wasn't just the attempt to get in, but the way it happened. There was no rush, no uncontrolled noise, no insistence. Whoever was on the other side of the door knew exactly what they were doing. They tested the key, pressed against the door, and left the moment they realized it wouldn't work. To this day, when I stay somewhere alone, I pay extra attention to the sound of the lock and always put something against the door at night, even knowing it doesn't really stop anything. That night in a simple motel in the interior of North Carolina taught me how fragile the feeling of safety can be. Sometimes all that separates you from someone on the other side is a piece of metal turning silently, and the fact that it stopped before opening is what most makes me think about what could have happened if that key had worked. Story 7. I had been living for a few years in a suburban neighborhood in Oregon when this happened. It was a quiet place with wide streets, houses set far apart from one another, and a linear park that cut through part of the neighborhood, surrounded by metal fencing. I used to walk at night to clear my head after work, always along the same route because it was well lit and seemed safe. That particular night it was already past 10, and the neighborhood was far too quiet, with few windows lit and no cars passing at that moment. The path ran along the park's fence for a few blocks. On the other side, all you could see were trees, dark trails, and a few weak streetlights illuminating patches of the interior. I was walking at a steady pace, listening to my own footsteps on the asphalt, when I noticed movement on the other side of the fence. A man appeared walking inside the park, parallel to me. At first, I didn't think it was strange. I assumed it was someone taking his own night walk just on the inside of the fence. After a few meters, I began to notice that his pace matched mine too closely. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. When I slowed down slightly to avoid a darker stretch of sidewalk, he slowed down too. When I returned to my normal pace, he did the same. The distance between us remained exactly the same, separated only by the metal fence. That started to bother me in a way that was hard to explain. It wasn't obvious enough for me to react immediately, but it was far too consistent to ignore. I glanced at him and saw that he kept his gaze forward, as if he were simply walking, but his posture seemed calculated. I decided to test it. I stopped suddenly, pretending to adjust my shoelace. At that exact moment, I heard the footsteps on the other side stop. I stood up slowly and saw that he had stopped too, just a few meters from me, motionless, now looking directly at me without trying to hide it. I stayed like that for a few seconds, feeling my stomach tighten. When I started walking again, he resumed at the exact same time. At that point, it no longer felt like coincidence. It was directed attention, focused, as if he were using my movements as a reference. My body went into automatic alert. I didn't run, but I didn't relax either. I kept a steady pace, trying to look normal, while every part of me observed what was happening. The man said nothing. He didn't cough, didn't check his phone, didn't deviate from the path. He simply walked at the same rhythm, maintaining that distance too precise to be casual. The fence between us made a faint noise when the wind hit it, a constant metallic creak that began to irritate me. It was as if that fence were the only thing maintaining a separation that, in practice, didn't mean much. I kept walking, trying to remember where that stretch of the park ended. I knew the fence didn't go all the way to the end of the street. There was an open entrance a few meters ahead, where the park connected directly to the sidewalk. Thinking about that made my chest tighten. Up to that point, he was separated from me by metal. After that, he wouldn't be. I slowed down without realizing it, just to buy time, and he did the same. It felt as if he were guiding me toward a specific point or waiting for me to reach it. I thought about crossing the street to move away from the fence, but something made me hesitate. I didn't want to turn my back or look like I was running away. I kept the original route, even as the tension increased with every step. At one point, I stopped again, pretending to check my phone. The man stopped as well at exactly the same relative point. He turned his body slightly, facing the fence, and this time he kept his eyes fixed on me without any attempt to hide it. There was no clear expression on his face, no anger, no smile. Just total attention, as if he were waiting for some reaction from me. When I resumed walking, I could already see the end of the fence approaching. The park entrance was just ahead, an open space where the fence ended and gave way to a small dirt path. The streetlight there was malfunctioning, flickering slightly, creating irregular shadows on the ground. The man on the other side began to slow down before I did, as if preparing to stop. That made my stomach churn. For the first time, I clearly felt that this was reaching some kind of conclusion, even without a single word spoken. When I reached the end of the fence, I stopped without immediately realizing it. The fence ended there and the sidewalk continued open, with no barrier between me and the park. I instinctively looked to the side, expecting to see the man still walking inside. He was no longer moving. He was standing exactly at the park entrance, just a few meters from me, at the point where our paths could cross without any obstacle. His posture was relaxed but intentional. He didn't look like someone who had arrived there by chance. He looked like someone who had been waiting for that exact spot. We stood there for a few seconds in silence, staring at each other. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, and the rest of the neighborhood seemed to disappear. No cars passed. No doors opened. He didn't step forward, but he didn't move away either. He just stood there looking directly at me as if evaluating something. The distance between us was too short for me to feel comfortable, and the complete absence of words made everything heavier. I had a clear sense that if I made the wrong move, something would change quickly. I broke eye contact first, more out of reflex than conscious decision. I took a few steps backward, still without fully turning my body, trying to keep him in my field of vision. He didn't follow me. He didn't advance or retreat. He simply adjusted his posture, like someone realizing that the moment he was waiting for had passed. That was almost worse than if he had come toward me. The idea that he had been evaluating, deciding whether it was worth it or not, became painfully clear. My heart was pounding, but I tried not to show panic. I turned and began walking quickly, now fully moving away from the park entrance. I didn't run, but I didn't keep my previous pace either. I looked over my shoulder a few times. He was still there, standing in the same spot, now partially lit by the weak streetlight. He didn't call out to me, didn't make any gesture. He just watched. As the distance grew, I felt a strange, incomplete relief, as if I had narrowly escaped something. Only when I turned the corner and lost sight of the park did my legs truly start to shake. I arrived home with the feeling that the walk had been longer than usual. I locked the door as soon as I went in and stood still in the living room for a few seconds, listening to the silence of the place. No strange sounds, no open windows, nothing out of place. Even so, it took time before I could relax. I went to the front window and looked out at the street, half expecting to see someone standing on the sidewalk or moving among the shadows. I saw no one. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had, calm and indifferent to what had just happened to me. That night, I took a long time to fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image returned of the man stopping when I stopped, walking when I walked, maintaining that distance too precise to be accidental. What bothered me most wasn't the following itself, but the control. He never tried to approach before the fence ended. He never ran. He never said a word. He just accompanied me, as if guiding the situation toward a specific point. The park entrance didn't feel random, it felt chosen. In the days that followed, I avoided walking at night. I drove past the same route a few times during the day, trying to see the park in a more rational way. The fence was still there, the entrance in the same place. Nothing visually threatening. Even so, I couldn't look at that stretch without feeling a knot in my stomach. I began to notice how the fence created a false sense of security. While it existed, I felt protected. When it ended, everything changed in seconds. I never saw that man again. No incident was reported, no similar account appeared in the neighborhood group. In a way, that was what disturbed me most. There was no confirmation of anything, no explanation. Just that night when someone chose to walk behind a fence at the same pace as me, stopping when I stopped, until the exact point where the separation ceased to exist. To this day, when I walk near that park, I make a point of changing my route before reaching the end of the fence. Because that night in the suburbs of Oregon, I learned that danger doesn't always come running after you. Sometimes it just follows in silence, waiting for the moment when there will be nothing left between you.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.